Hey everyone, it's Jason Pannone, Head of Reference and Cultural Assets Manager here at the East Hartford Public Library. I'm recording this installment of Raiders of the Lost Archive from home. You'll notice our cat Jupiter in the background. But I want to talk today about the Pitkins and the whole slew of Pitkin-related artifacts that we have in our collection. There's some very cool stuff in there. So let's first talk about the Pitkins. I'm going to be super brief because I could go on forever about them. The Pitkins basically were the family in Connecticut in the 18th century. They were very prolific. They more or less ran the colony. They were that prolific and well connected and well extended. Um, and they lived on this side of the river. In fact, the last colonial governor of Connecticut, William Pitkin III, is buried in Center Cemetery right down the street from the library. I'll mention him a little bit later. And Pitkin Street in East Hartford is obviously named after them. The Pitkins are still around. They were very prolific. They're all over the country, and I believe they're still a branch of the family in the UK. So that's kind of cool. Now, the Pitkins, like I said, were very prominent. They basically ran the colony. If there was in the legislature, in the judiciary, even in the church, there were Pitkins who were ministers in the Congregational Church. Timothy Pitkin was the minister over in Farmington at the Congregational Church for a long time. And you can really learn more if you go to the Center Cemetery website. I'll post that in the description, and you can listen to the podcast there about the various members of the Pitkin family. And not only were the Pitkins involved in the governing of the state and in religious life, they were also involved commercially. They had their hands in everything, and as a result, they became one of the wealthiest, if not one of the wealthiest families in the colony. They were involved in mills of all kinds, in grist mills, cotton mills, cloth mills, gunpowder mills, glass works, all sorts of things, not just in farming, because farming was only a seasonal thing. And if you wanted to make money, you had to have your hands in lots of pots. And thus, you're going to see some of the stuff here. If you go to the Center Cemetery website, they talk about Henry Pitkin. And Henry Pitkin apparently was one of the men who, if he had been successful, would have been one of the major figures in the Industrial Revolution, as he discovered a way to mass produce pocket watches, which is really, really neat. I just learned that myself while doing research for this podcast. So that's super cool. So with that, we'll start. Oh, one thing I do have on my notes that I want to mention, connected with Governor William Pitkin III, we actually have an arrest warrant that was signed by him in, I believe, 1767, be signed to arrest the tax collector for the colony who lived in my hometown of Colchester, for he didn't turn in the tax money that he was supposed to. And apparently the man was eventually arrested, and he just had absconded with the funds. And I don't know that he ever paid it back, but it is kind of a neat thing. The other thing to make note of is that this piece of paper was reused for several years until 1770. Paper was a rare and valuable commodity in colonial America, mostly because there just weren't paper mills here in the States, in what became the United States and the colonies. All the paper had to come from the UK, so paper was not wasted. It's not like today where you write a little piece of paper, then you throw the whole thing out. Paper would be reused until you basically couldn't use it anymore. So it's kind of a neat thing. That sits in the display case with the glass on the second floor, just right outside the administrative offices. So when we're back open again, stop by and take a look at it. So with that, I am going to turn and do a discussion about the silver. What we have here is examples of silver made by some of the Pitkin silversmiths here in East Hartford. There were 3 to 4 generations of them here. So I'll just talk a little bit briefly about the silversmiths. So there were 3 to 4 generations of silversmiths here in East Hartford, and also in Hartford. Very prominent, very lucrative business. It might bring up the question of how did Silver Lane get its name? I've heard two stories. The first is that because there were a number of silversmiths or a silversmith who lived on that street back in the day, and that's how the street got its name. The other one is that it's the site of where the French paymaster, when Rochambeau's army was marching through, that's where the French paymaster handed out the silver to the soldiers. Which one is true? I don't know. Take your pick. But there you go. Another thing that the Pitkins were involved in making was gunpowder. And the gunpowder mill stood by the Hockenham River across where the old Marco Polo used to sit, which is now an Indian restaurant. The gunpowder was used during the American Revolution by the colonial militias, especially the Connecticut militias. And the Pitkins were very patriotic. So it's kind of neat to think that they were very crucial to helping the United States win its independence. So if people ask, well, what's East Hartford important for in the history of the country? You can say, well, they helped us win our independence. So that's pretty cool. The funny thing, or the sad thing is rather, that the Pitkins were never paid for their gunpowder. And what you can see here are two old photographs of Pitkin Falls, which is where some of the gunpowder was made, and you can see the little notation in the picture underneath each of them that indicates that. So because they were never paid for their gunpowder, the state legislature gave the family the monopoly on snuff making, which is powdered tobacco, and on glass making in Connecticut for 25 years. So the Pitkins made glass here in Connecticut. There were several Pitkins, William Pitkin IV, the son of William Pitkin III, some of his cousins and some other investors, and they built a glass factory here in East Hartford. The glass factory lasted until about 1830. It was never completely profitable, but the glassware they made is very unique, very pretty, and we have some examples of Pitkin-style glass, thanks to some generous donors who wanted this part of East Hartford history documented. So the photo you see here is some of our Pitkin glass, but also other glass that was made here in Connecticut from the late 18th century through about the third quarter of the 19th century. And it's just kind of neat to see all the different shapes, styles, colors that were made here, and just how important Connecticut industry was in the Industrial Revolution. Examples of some of our Pitkin glass. The Pitkins were also involved in the making of paper as well as cloth. And they had grist mills as well, where they would grind corn and wheat and such. So the paper mill actually is still in business. It's over on Scotland Road, I believe. I'm getting that wrong. But it is there still. The woolen mills and the cloth mills, I believe, are not there, nor the grist mills. And it's just an example of the Pitkins taking advantage of all the free hydropower from all the Hockenham River and all the little rivers and streams that dot the New England landscape. Obviously, they're not alone in doing that. New England is known for taking advantage of it, not just here in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, old towns like Lowell and Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Lowell, Massachusetts, that is. So it's really neat to see these pictures of these old mills, and just to think that all these small industries were started by the Pitkin family here in East Hartford. Clock made by Levi Pitkin and chair owned by William Pitkin III. Connecticut Magazine issue from 1902 showing a picture of the Pitkin chair than when it was in New Haven. So the last thing I'm going to show you is a grandfather clock that was made by Levi Pitkin and a 18th century chair that was owned by Governor William Pitkin III. So as I mentioned, Henry Pitkin was a watchmaker. He was also a silversmith. And this is just part of this clock made by Levi Pitkin, is just part of Connecticut being one of the epicenters of clockmaking and the development of timekeeping here in the United States. You can think of Eli Terry, Seth Thomas. Lots and lots of clockmakers got their start here in Connecticut. and it was an important part of the Industrial Revolution into manufacturing in Connecticut for over a century. The chair is kind of neat. It has reproduction. It has been restored and refurbished, so the reproduction damask on the seat is not original, but it's neat to have that connection to one of the founding families, not only of East Hartford, but of Connecticut. And it was a neat little twist. I was doing some research, going through our archives, and I came across this old issue of The Connecticut magazine, which was apparently a history quarterly that was printed during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And one of the articles shows a picture of our Pitkin chair, which is really cool, and it indicates that the owner is a woman who lived at the time in New Haven. And I'm very curious to know how the chair got from East Hartford to New Haven and then back to East Hartford. I suspect it was probably acquired by Edward King, who's the man who gave the seed money to start the library's museum collection back in 1950 upon his death. So just little cool connections that you find all over the place that really show that East Hartford is not a nowhere place. It really is part of a wider world and a bigger conversation about Connecticut history, manufacturing, and more. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, take a look at the resources that I put in the description for the video. And I hope you have a great day. So keep washing those hands, practice safe social distancing, and be well, and we'll catch you next time.